Sean Connery made it very clear that he would only be returning one more time in Diamonds Are Forever. When his wife had asked him if he would ever be playing James Bond again, his exact words were,
"Never again."
Sean Connery was out, so for the third time in a row the producers were left with no leading man to star as James Bond. A new Bond was needed, and one that could prove to the world that there was life after Sean Connery. Producer Harry Saltzman was very keen on bringing in Roger Moore as the next James Bond. He was already an established actor at the time, most notably being known for his role as Simon Templar in the TV series The Saint, but Moore also played various other TV characters such as Ivanhoe, the Noble Knight, and Maverick, the Wild West card sharp, and he also featured as the leading man in The Persuaders. And for that he was paid the then unheard of sum of £1 million for a single series, making him the highest paid TV series actor in the world. Moore had been considered for Bond a couple of times before, and what a lot of people don't know is that he actually already played James Bond before in a small sketch in a short-lived TV series called Mainly Millicent way back in 1964.
Perhaps Monsieur would like to take drinks on the patio?
Yes. That's quite a nice little casino you've got there. A nice secluded corner.
Over there, Mr. Bond?
Yes, well, I am on holiday. Thank you.
Oh, don't give me that. James Bond is never on holiday. Everybody knows that. Besides, I haven't come to spy on you.
Oh, if you're not here to spy on me, you must be here to spy on somebody else. And if you're here to spy on somebody else, I'll have to spy on you to find out who you're spying on. Couldn't you have gone to Omsk? But I know you.
Me, sir? Ah! Oh! Ah!
Waiter! Bring me another waiter!
Try one of mine.
Sonia, really?
Well, I was trying to give them up.
With throaters like that, you don't need matches.
Your drinks, monsieur.
Oh,
Madame.
thank you. Thank you very much.
You, know that woman over there?
No, but I know that woman over there.
Cheers.
Do vidania.
With Roger Moore now replacing Sean Connery, he wanted to make sure he didn't copy Connery's Bond style, but he wanted to bring a completely different take on the character, which is why, especially in his first James Bond film, he is seen smoking cigars instead of cigarettes and drinking bourbon instead of vodka martini. It was Fleming's second novel, Live and Let Die, which would be loosely adapted for the next Bond adventure, and since the blaxploitation films were so popular in the early 70s, it would be heavily influenced by that, and it would feature an almost complete black cast. Guy Hamilton returned once again to direct the movie after previously directing Goldfinger and Diamonds Are Forever. So here we have a new James Bond starring in a blaxploitation adventure. How does Live and Let Die hold up today? So we see Roger Moore in the gun barrel for the first time, and the most notable thing about it is that he's the first Bond not to wear a hat in the gun barrel. Also, the music was very different, times were changing. The movie opens up at the United Nations in New York, and various world leaders and representatives are gathered. Most notably Mr. Kananga, a dictator of the fictional Caribbean island San Monique. We see the representative of the United Kingdom, who is actually a British agent, getting killed in some sort of supersonic way.
órák számához hozzá kell adnunk az úgynevezett, hogyha
Meanwhile, in New Orleans, another British agent is monitoring a place called the Fillet of Souls when some people pass by who are having a funeral.
Whose funeral is it?
yours.
So this agent also gets killed, and out of nowhere this whole crowd starts doing this. I mean, this stuff could easily pass for a Michael Jackson video clip. And finally, on San Monique itself, we see this voodoo cult killing a third British agent using a snake. And then the movie goes into the opening titles. So wait, there's no Bond showing up in the pre-title sequence? Well, that's a first. Well, technically Bond wasn't in the pre-title sequence of From Russia With Love either, as the guy in that was revealed to be just a random guy with a James Bond mask. But yes, this is indeed a first one not to show Bond in any form before the opening titles. And the title song, by the way, is performed by none other than Paul McCartney.
Say live and let die.
It's a song that became immensely popular and is still viewed as one of the best ones in the series. It's not one of my all-time favorite ones in the series though, but that's just personal taste. After the titles, we do get to see Bond, immediately, in his own place, with a random Italian chick in his bed. I always thought it was a shame that Roger Moore's introduction as Bond was so simple. Connery's Bond was introduced in such a badass way, how they showed small glimpses before actually getting to the big reveal. Even Lazenby had some sort of dramatic build-up before his face was shown. But with Roger, he's just there, as if he had always been Bond, but oh well. So M is ringing his door with an urgent call. He tells Bond about the killings of the 3 British agents and he wants Bond to investigate what happened, starting out in New York. So the plot is very similar to that one of Dr. No, just a simple agents got killed, find out why story. There's also some fun playing around with Bond's Italian chick having to hide because M is there, and Moneypenny covers for Bond. It's goofy, playful stuff, and it makes for a nice change of the regular office scene we normally get. And Moneypenny gives Bond his gadgets instead of Q, who is not in this movie. I don't know why exactly. From what I gather, Desmond Llewellyn was already tied to a TV series during the time of filming, but I'm not completely sure about that one. But yes, he receives a magnifying watch, able to attract all metal and even turn into a saw. It's an over-the-top gadget that becomes the standard with the Roger Moore Bond films. So Bond now has his mission and Moneypenny and M leave, and there's a fun scene of Bond trying out his new watch on his Italian chick.
Such a delicate touch.
Sheer magnetism, Bonnie.
So Bond sets out to New York City, and I gotta say, the way Moore is dressed here, it's just so ridiculously badass and classy. It's definitely one of my favorite Bond outfits in the series. Felix Leiter also returns in this movie, and this time is played by David Hedison, one of the better actors to play the part. Felix is monitoring the dictator of San Monique, Mr. Kananga, played by Yaphet Kotto, who is the main villain of this movie. And if you're watching these movies in order, it's a relief to have a fresh change of villains instead of having the usual Spectre and Blofeld pretty much every time. So Bond gets picked up by a driver who all of a sudden gets shot by a villain named Whisper driving a pimpmobile. So some nice action kicks in, and after that Bond, using the help of Felix Leiter, finds out that this pimpmobile is registered at the occult voodoo shop. So Bond goes in there, snoops around a little bit and sneaks into the back room. He finds the car and decides to follow it in a taxi, and the car moves into Harlem, which I'm sure you know is mostly populated by African Americans, and pretty much everyone that is black in this movie seems to be connected, as they're all secretly giving signals to each other. Even Bond's cab driver himself. It is something taken from the novel, and in the way that Bond is surrounded by all these stereotypical 70s black people, he seems especially white.
Good afternoon.
I mean, you can really sense that he's just out of place here, so it's actually very well done. So Bond's thrill ends up here at the Filet of Soul restaurant, and he orders a drink and he asks the waiter for information, which I swear seems to be Roger Moore's Bond's signature thing to ask for. It's always information. Anyway, instead of information, the whole wall turns around and Bond is brought into a back room, and it's here that Moore makes his Bond introduction.
My name's Bond. James Bond.
I like the way Moore has such a different take on the character than Connery does. It gives the movie a very fresh feel. We also got introduced to Solitaire, a tarot card reading fortune teller working for the villain, who is this movie's Bond girl, played by Jane Seymour, and one of the henchmen of the movie, Tee-Hee, who has a claw for a hand and laughs all the time. And most of the characters in this movie are all really good and memorable. We also get introduced to another villain, Mr. Big, who seems to be the leader of all these hoodlums here, and he quickly tells his goons to waste Bond, but Bond just casually picks one of Solitaire's cards and this happens.
Us? Now, promise you'll stay right there. I shan't be long.
I mean, in the way that Moore is just so relaxed and confident about all this, it's just hilarious, it's so different. Where Connery's Bond was funny in a clever and cunning way, Moore's Bond is just the king of sarcasm and tongue-in-cheek humor. Anyway, of course, Bond outsmarts the villains who are supposed to kill him, and he escapes with almost the only black guy in the movie not to be a villain but a CIA guy.
The disguise you're wearing, white face in Harlem. Good thinking, Bond.
So Bond and this guy discuss how apparently Mr. Big and Kananga are connected, and Felix informs Bond that Kananga is due to leave back to San Monique, and Bond is booked on a flight to get there too. So we get to San Monique, the fictional island in the Caribbean, the place where voodoo seems to be very much alive, as does Baron Samedi, the god of the dead, or as this movie informs us, just an actor playing him. Bond checks in at the hotel, snoops around a little bit for bugs, and once again it is shown that the villains are aware of his presence as a snake is put into his room and Whisper is around again. And we are also introduced here to Rosie Carver, another CIA agent sent out by Felix to aid him on his mission, and she gets my pick for being the most annoying Bond girl in the series.
Should have never gotten into any of this.
She just cannot act for the life of her, and on top of it all, more importantly, I don't find her particularly hot either. And that's coming from a guy who likes colored women, but yeah, of course that's just personal taste again. And she's shown being extremely scared of voodoo, and Bond just deals with it in typical Roger Moore fashion.
There's a...
Oh, a snake. I forgot. I should have told you should never go in there without a mongoose.
So the next day, Bond and Rosie go out to pick a boat. So Bond picks the one with the laziest guy, who the film lets us believe is yet another villain, which is not a strange thought with all these villains in this movie being black and connected and all, but it turns out that he is actually another ally, Quarrel Jr. Yes, he's supposed to be the son of Quarrel from Dr. No. It's nice that they're throwing out a reference here, and in the novels Quarrel was normally first introduced in Live and Let Die and then came back in the later novel Dr. No, but we all know the filmmakers adapted these movies completely out of order, and at this stage they're very loosely based on the novels anyway, but just looking at the movie franchise on its own, it's a nice bit of continuity here. So Bond and Rosie have a look around at the place where the third British agent got killed in the pre-title sequence, and meanwhile Solitaire is forced to predict the future all the time for Kananga, telling him that Bond is coming. So essentially she's Kananga's prisoner and slave, and he uses her gift to his advantage.
They're coming. Rosie knows what to do.
So it turns out Rosie is actually a double agent working for Kananga, but Bond already seems to be aware of this because he already received a tarot card at the hotel from Solitaire warning him that she's a cheat. So of course Bond chooses the responsible thing by first and foremost having sex with her and then asking the questions.
You don't understand, sir. They'll kill me if I do.
And I'll kill you if you don't.
But you couldn't. You wouldn't. Not after what we just done.
I certainly wouldn't have killed you before.
But Rosie runs off, too scared about the whole voodoo thing surrounding Kananga, and she's indeed killed, not by actual voodoo, but by a hidden gun in a voodoo scarecrow. Thank heavens that's her out of the way. So Solitaire is constantly covering up for Bond, and it is explained how Solitaire is a virgin, and her fortune-telling powers would disappear if someone has sex with her, which seems to be the exact opposite of my girlfriend. I mean, she seems to think she got the powers to predict my whole future after becoming my girlfriend, but yes, I digress. Solitaire makes for an interesting Bond girl, and with her supernatural powers and being some sort of priest and a virgin, it makes her that much more of an interesting and memorable character. So anyway, Bond flies in on Solitaire's house, hang gliding with his cigar in typical Roger Moore fashion. He sneaks in and tells Solitaire to pick a card.
Pick one.
So basically he just cheats his way into Solitaire's pants. She's a virgin that's pretty much forced to have sex. However, in the way Moore pulls it all off here, I just find it hilarious. Besides, by the logic of the movie, the cards had already predicted they would be lovers previously, and this speeds up the process, and since Bond now took away her powers, ultimately she cannot help Kananga anymore, thus preventing a lot of evil stuff, so there are some good consequences to Bond banging her.
Cheer up, darling. Has to be a first time for everyone.
So Solitaire is all concerned and explains how she has now lost her gift, and again I always just piss myself laughing at Moore's expression here. He just completely goes what the fuck and thinks everything she says is complete bullcrap. I mean, Roger Moore truly shines on the humor front. Oh, and also, now that Solitaire has had sex once, for some reason she turns into a nympho and wants to do it all the time now, and Bond of course just rolls with it and helps her out with that problem.
Is there time before we leave? For lesson number 3.
Absolutely. There's no sense in going off half-cocked.
So Bond and Solitaire run off together and look around at the place where the third agent got killed in the beginning of the movie. Bond finds out that Kananga is producing 2 tons of heroin there and is protecting all of this using the fear of voodoo that all the locals have around there. Of course, Kananga is informed that Bond ran off with his girl, and he sends some of his policemen after them, and Bond and Solitaire escape in this double-decker bus, and we get one of the many memorable action scenes in this movie. So anyway, the pair flies over to New Orleans, and of course Bond is captured by Kananga's men, and Solitaire all of a sudden pretends that she never wanted to go with Bond.
My only regret is I won't be there to see it.
So Solitaire is back with the villains, and we get another small action scene in which Bond hops into a tiny airplane which has Miss Bell in it, awaiting her flying lesson. And as you can expect from a typical Bond movie of the 70s, this action scene is full of typical cheesiness that most of the Roger Moore Bond movies are full of. You know, idiotic villains making fools of themselves, wings chopping off, and having a stereotypical character there meant for the gags.
Holy shit.
Same time tomorrow, Mrs. Bell?
I know it's all part of the era, but I'm just not a huge fan of all this tacky stuff. Meanwhile, Bond meets up with Felix again in front of the Filet of Soul restaurant with the happy funeral parade where the second agent got killed, and Bond manages to get captured in one of these restaurants again. So once again Bond fell into a trap of Mr. Big, the gangster we were shortly introduced to back in Harlem, and Mr. Big seems to be really interested whether or not Bond has banged Solitaire, who is also there, and Bond doesn't want to tell him but only wants to speak to Kananga. And then the big reveal comes. Mr. Big is Kananga. I mean, seriously, did anyone ever fall for this on first viewing? It's so plain obvious that it was also Yaphet Kotto, and, you know, since Mr. Big and Kananga pretty much have the same henchmen around them all the time and both use Solitaire to their advantage, it's a real anticlimactic reveal. But yes, Kananga reveals his dastardly plan here, which is to produce all the heroin and then sell it all free of charge using his Mr. Big alter ego. And since all the heroin will be free to the customers, all the competing drug dealers will be forced out of the business. And once there are so much people addicted to the heroin, then Kananga will charge insanely high prices for it. It's an interesting plan among the more realistic villain schemes in the series. But apart from this little scene here, nothing really happens with it, and it's not really a main focus of the movie. Again, kinda like how Dr. No's missile toppling plan was not really a main focus in that movie. But the scene does, however, become tense, with Teehee threatening to break Bond's fingers to see if Solitaire still has her gift. And of course Bond has banged her and she lost her powers, which pisses Kananga off, and Bond is knocked out and is taken to this alligator farm where he is left on a tiny island in the middle of the pond. And it's probably one of the most memorable scenes in this movie, how Bond escapes running along the alligators, which is cool and it was done for real. They're not fake alligator props or anything. And this stunt is performed by the man who owned the farm, whose name really was Kananga, which is who the main villain was named after. Just some small trivia there. Then more action comes in as Bond escapes in a speedboat and is followed by some villains. And though this is probably the main action set piece of the movie, I might be controversial on this, but it's just so long. Sure, there are cool stunts in it and it's exciting, but there's just so much going on. There's a wedding being disturbed, idiotic villains making fools of themselves again, and we also got introduced to one of those stereotypical characters meant for the gags. Enter Redneck Sheriff W. Pepper of the Louisiana State Police.
Exactly your debut with this sort of thing.
And he's just annoying, and he's in the action scene for such a long time, and it makes it so jarring to me. There's so much gags with him, and most of them just leave me rolling my eyes. It also becomes less exciting to me because this action scene doesn't have any background music for a large portion of the sequence. So, if you ask me, there's some great action here, but for my taste, it just should have been shorter. When all of that action ends, Bond goes back to Sam Monique to rescue Solitaire at the voodoo place, and Baron Samedi is there again and is meant to kill her. Of course, Bond rushes in and places some charges at the heroin fields, and he rescues Solitaire. And there's also some confusing stuff going on as Bond shoots Baron Samedi, who I guess turns out to be just a prop, but then the real Baron Samedi shows up and Bond throws him into a coffin of snakes, and we get this stupid death scene. I mean, that shit rivals the way that guy from Diamonds Are Forever died. So Bond discovers Kananga has a lair underneath the whole complex, and we get a climax there. And Kananga has this really weird gun that inflates everything it shoots at. And Bond and Solitaire are left dangling above this pool of sharks, which does give it some typical James Bond villain fashion. But of course Bond has his watch that turns into a saw and he manages to free himself. And he ends up fighting Kananga and falling into the pool of sharks, and they end up fighting underwater. And that's exciting. So is that thing from the ceiling gonna collapse on Kananga's head? Or maybe even worse, maybe the sharks are gonna eat Kananga alive. How is he gonna die? I mean, just what? That has to be the worst villain dead in the series. I mean, is he just made out of air and no blood? It's just such an anticlimax to this character. I mean, Kananga was a cool villain. He felt fresh coming after an era of Bond movies that had Blofeld as the villain, and in the way he used voodoo to protect himself and had an alter ego to carry out a plan, and had some awesome henchmen and people working for him everywhere. It made him seem all untouchable and powerful. Now why the hell did they have to go all Charlie and a Chocolate Factory on him on the end? What were they thinking? But yes, the movie ends with Bond and Solitaire going on a train in the end of the movie, and Solitaire wants to have sex once again. I mean, it's Jane Seymour in the 70s, man. Who wouldn't do it? But of course, Tee-hee was still alive and comes after Bond, and we get a good fighting scene. And Tee-hee is left with his claws stuck on the window, and Bond throws him out. So we get a happy ending with Bond and the girl. And for some reason, the movie ends with Baron Samedi being alive all of a sudden again on the front of the train. So, I guess when he got thrown into that coffin of snakes, he didn't really die. I mean, I understand that he was supposed to be a voodoo god who can't die, but the movie used the voodoo just to protect Kananga during the whole movie, and we are constantly shown that the voodoo isn't really real. It's just fake props that Kananga uses to protect himself. But in the end, the movie goes all, ha, he's alive, he can't die, fuck all logic, and it's just weird. Live and Let Die is a mixed bag to me. Compared to its predecessor, it's a huge step up, where Diamonds was mostly corny humor and lots of tacky stuff. Here, at least a lot of the jokes are actually funny and even hilarious in parts, and that largely comes down to Roger Moore, who makes a great debut here and brings in a brilliant take on his James Bond. His style is so different to anything that came before, and he truly proved that there was life after Sean Connery. Another huge plus Live and Let Die has its cast of characters. Solitary, Kananga, Tee-hee, Whisper, they're all very interesting and memorable. Well, most of them. But Live and Let Die also has a lot of stuff I don't really like, and maybe that all comes down to personal taste. You see, I'm just not a huge fan of the tacky Bond stuff like Miss Bell and Sheriff W. Pepper, Baron Samedi dying and then being alive again, and worst of all, the inflatable Kananga at the climax. Just what the fuck, man, that brought the movie down a lot for me. So while Live and Let Die has a lot going for it, and to me most of that is all in the first half of the movie, it also has some stuff going against it, and ultimately making it a very mediocre Bond movie for me. It's a great debut for Roger Moore, but definitely not one of my favorite ones that he did.